Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Watkins. I'm the Vice President for Cox Business Virginia. We're so excited to be back with our virtual executive discussion series. This is our 46th in the series since we began back in 2009. Having successfully transitioned this event from an in-person to virtual format, we are today bringing the executive discussion series not just to our loyal followers in Hampton Roads, but also to audiences around the state, particularly in Northern Virginia and Roanoke, where Cox Business proudly serves the technology needs of businesses big and small across a wide variety of industries. We welcome everyone. We're honored that you have taken time this morning to be with us. The executive discussion series is really not possible without our partnership with John Donnellan and his colleagues at Inside Business. We thank them for developing this discussion together with us and making it possible for all of you to participate and take away valuable information that can benefit your organizations. Kudos also to the Cox Business Marketing Team led by Barbara Sykes for the work that Kathleen Conway and Marissa Covington do, bringing this event to you as well. Well, can you believe it? It's been 7 months since the pandemic struck. No one has been spared from the economic impact of COVID-19, which is why we're focusing today on statewide economic recovery efforts. We want to extend our appreciation and thanks to our panel of experts who will shed light on initiatives around the state to help us get back on our feet, recognize business opportunities, and address the challenges that exist in the new normal. Although somebody told me the other day on a meeting, we shouldn't be calling it new normal. It's not new, and it's certainly weird. Well, if you've attended our EDS events in the past, you know that we're fortunate and blessed to have Kathy Lewis with us again as our moderator. As you'll see today, she does a phenomenal job at each one of our events. She's a professional speaker and trainer, backed by more than 25 years of experience in the corporate world. Kathy is the founding host of Hearsay with Kathy Lewis on public radio, 89.5 WHRV FM radio in Hampton Roads. On air, she continues to stir the conversation around the hot topics of today, including the pandemic, racial injustice, and the elections. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our moderator, Kathy Lewis.
Good morning, Tom, and good morning to all of you who are joining us this morning. This is such an exciting moment for Cox Business and for Inside Business because it's the first time, as Tom said, we've taken this statewide. And from my perspective, it's one of those silver linings in what has been a pretty weird time. I think you're right, Tom. It's a great way to describe it. So we're awfully glad to have you with us today. No question, COVID-19 is teaching us all a lot about ourselves and about each other. And today we're thinking through some of the ways the Commonwealth and all its very distinct regions weather the storm and what we're now coming to think of as our new weird normal. We are so pleased to have with us today some very big thinkers from all over the Commonwealth to give us a sense of what's ahead. And we'll be asking you some questions as well along the way because we want to make this as interactive as we can with so many people on the line. And here, in fact, Billy, is our first question of the morning. It is multiple choice, as all our questions are. There are no wrong answers, so fear not. Our first question asks you to get a little predictive and help us think through your sense of when you think this is going to be over, when we return to what we've thought of as business as usual. Billy, do you want to tell the folks how they can engage this question?
Absolutely, and I love this question so much because it's so much fun to try to predict the future, as difficult as that can be. So right now, I am launching this poll for you. All of our attendees should see the poll popping up on your screen right now, very large, asking the question of when do you think we'll return to business? And I can see you're already figuring it out. We've already reached about 12% in. So we're going to give it just a second for this to populate. But I find it really interesting, Kathy. Already there is a definite trend with over 40% of the respondents coming through saying the second half of 2021. We do have about a 20% split with the first half of 2021, and there is a considerable quarter of our audience right now is projecting 2022 or.
Well, that is, that's real. I think that's really interesting because I think if we'd have done this 3 months ago, those answers might have been a little different. I think a lot has changed probably over the course of the summer. So Billy, you let us know when all the folks have weighed in and we'll take a look at those results.
Sure. We are about a minute into it. 3/4 of our audience have voted on this. The trends remain the same, although I will tell you that second half of 2021 is now above 50%. So
Wow.
Just really reinforcing that early trend. So I'm going to pull this one down because I know we've got another question to ask.
Great, that is fantastic. So most of us think it's going to, we'll get back to some semblance of normalcy in the second half of 2021. That is a significant shift, I think, from the way that most people were thinking about this several months ago. And of course, it has some implications for how we move forward in our business planning. Our second question has to do with your revenues. Where are your revenues this year compared with last year at this time? Billy, you want to show the options there?
Yes, ma'am. So you'll be choosing from higher, the same, lower, and you're already doing great. Audience, thank you so much. At this point, Kathy, I have to report, unfortunately, about 3/4 of respondents at this point are indicating that revenues are lower. We've got about 50% of the audience in, so we'll see where that goes. But right now, definitely on the negative side.
Wow, that's tough, but I suppose to a great extent, not surprising if we think about where we are right now. That certainly is an issue for the Commonwealth as well, because when our revenues are down, that means less revenues to the Commonwealth. And in just a few moments, we're going to hear from the Commonwealth Secretary of Finance, Aubrey Lane, about what those implications are like, because he's the one who gets to figure all that out in terms of revenues coming in and expenditures going out. He's also the one that gets to figure out how to adjust the state budget for what was incredibly unforeseen. All right, Billy, are we still in the same realm there with our responses?
Yes, ma'am. Again, about the same amount of engagement. So thank you again to our audience for playing along with us. But yes, we did wind up still right at 67% reporting lower, 21% reporting about the same, with 11%, fortunately, seeing higher revenues than a year ago.
Well, I want you to think about these questions moving forward, because we have some other questions for you around how prepared your school system was, how you're feeling about that whole part of the equation, and what societal changes you might anticipate on the other side of COVID-19. We are so happy to have with us today the Commonwealth's Secretary of Finance, Aubrey Lane. He joins us today from Richmond, and when Governor Northam invited him to be Finance Secretary, he probably, as many of us could not have imagined the complexity of what he was about to step into, but he has been a steady hand on the tiller. We're so glad to have him with us this morning. Secretary Lane, thanks for being here. And I wonder if you could start us off with a sense of the state's financial position in the midst of COVID, and maybe talk a bit about some of the hard decisions you've had to make as an administration.
Well, sure, Kathy, and thank you all for having me here today. As I was looking at the questions the panel, the audience was answering, I would have been in the category of 22 or later as far as returning to normal. If you go back and look at, I think there's two factors that'll dictate that. One is when we get a trusted vaccine, will be a determinant of how fast economic activity will come in, and two, when the public feels confident in doing so. We've said from the very beginning, the best way to fix the economy is to get the health situation under control. And unfortunately, we've made progress, but it's not there. I'm sure many of the businesses are trending a lot like the Commonwealth, where we started feeling the impacts of this sometime in late March, early April. And of course, when the shutdowns occurred because of this, that's when business activity really slowed. It looks like the bottom, assuming we don't have a significant resurgence of this, was sometime around the 1st of May to the middle of May. And since then, we've seen a slow economic activity increase from that point forward. But of course, that did hit our revenues. What we've seen across the state is those companies, particularly large companies, that were able to work telework from home and had more sustainable business models in that environment, have done a little bit better. Our dependence on the federal government has helped the Commonwealth. They've remained open, and of course defense spending has remained robust. And of course, our shipyards in Hampton Roads, where you guys are mostly today, have remained open as a result of that. So the larger businesses that could telework have done fairly well. I'll throw in there the tech industry. Amazon has actually added jobs during this period, along with Micron and Microsoft and others. So if you're fortunate to be in those industries, you've done okay. Of course, if you were in the leisure or the hospitality, and I'll say many Main Street industries, you've been hit very hard. Any of those industries that require a social interaction for their model has been difficult over the last few months. And the governor has allowed, I guess that's the right word, we have gotten a hold of the level of positive virus cases across the Commonwealth to come down. Various economic activities have allowed to go forward. So hopefully we'll stay on that trend. And we've seen a steady increase, as I said, since early May in that regard. But our revenues have been impacted, not as much in the previous year, which ended June 30th as we thought, Kathy, because a lot of that quarter is dependent upon taxes, final payment of taxes from the previous year, or calendar 19. And they came in much stronger than we thought. But of course, that was for economic activity of the previous year. Our reforecast anticipates going forward, we'll be down about $2.7 billion from the original forecast. That's slightly behind the previous year. And a lot of that's been buoyed by the large companies that have remained open and have been able to continue payroll withholding. I will also say this, the consumer has been buoyed by the monetary and fiscal stimulus that came from the federal authorities, unprecedented. And I actually think that'll be a key part of how fast we recover if more of that is coming. Right now, it doesn't appear that's on the horizon, but that could change after the election, depending on who is in power. I think either party will have to do some additional fiscal work. So from the Commonwealth's perspective, we've been fortunate that we haven't been impacted nearly as much as some other states because of our reliance on the federal government. You know, we're sometimes pinged and things are really good, saying, oh, you're so reliant on the federal government. But when things get bad, it also tends to cushion us because of, and particularly in Hampton Roads with our defense industry in that regard. So it's been a mixed bag, but overall, obviously down. As we will transition away from the health as soon as we get this vaccine and move along and start and continue to help businesses get back on their feet. So that's what it's been a little bit across the Commonwealth, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Secretary Lane. Julie Coons is the president and CEO of the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. And Ms. Coons, could you give us a sense on the COVID business climate in as Secretary Lane would, and all of us would acknowledge, in a part of the state that drives so much of the economy?
Kathy, thank you, and delighted to be here this morning. Really, we are a reflection of what Secretary Lane just referenced. Overall, Northern Virginia has actually stayed at work. We transitioned to telework really very seamlessly. It was already a part of our culture. It might not have been obviously to the extent that it is now, that is required, but it was already a component of our internal systems and our culture. Again, as Secretary Lane referenced, we have a very large number of government contractors. And so between them, the professional services, banking and finance, largely business has continued to move forward fairly unimpeded. Now, that is not to say that in some sectors that revenues are not depressed somewhat, but largely we have been able to move forward and work. Now, I don't want to, though, ignore those who are suffering terribly in the hospitality industry. And we again have a very important component of our Northern Virginia economy in hospitality. And we know that that sector has suffered and is going to continue to suffer. So we at the Chamber have been very concerned about how we bring sectors of the economy back to work. And so we put in place the Back to Work Leadership Task Force and Coalition that's focused on making sure that we have available funds at both the state and the federal level for our education institutions and our workforce boards, so we can upskill and cross-skill folks whose industries are going to suffer for some time. But in many parts, we are very fortunate that work has continued pretty seamlessly.
And I wonder if you share Secretary Lane's belief that what will help or what will make a difference is additional relief funding. Will that make a difference in Northern Virginia?
Absolutely. We do continue to advocate for additional federal funds particularly for state and local, but also other funds that would, the extension of the PPP program. We think those are critical to continuing to help, particularly our small and mid-sized businesses, and no question those that are most adversely impacted. So yes, very strong advocate for that, and continue to talk to our federal representatives about this need.
By the way, you can send us your questions in the chat function of this wild and wonderful world that we weren't doing a year ago, but do feel free to do that. We also have some questions that you all have submitted in advance, which we very much appreciate, and we'll get to those in the course of our program. Some great questions, and Ms. Coons, one of them had to do with retraining, and particularly for people who are 50 and up. So we'll get to that question in a moment. Peter McHenry is the Tang Associate Professor of Economics at the College of William and Mary. Professor McHenry, thank you for being here today. And I guess I wonder whether the economic theories that you came into this extraordinary period with are holding up. What's changing from your perspective?
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks very much. So I am a labor economist, so I'm particularly interested in employment and work that people are doing. And so we've been watching things a lot, and economists have been very busy writing all sorts of papers and getting new data sets. I think the theory has been pretty robust over this year. We have a major shock. We're not able to get together in physical ways, and that obviously impedes a lot of the activity that drives demand for work and jobs that people have. And so that's just been a major shock, and trying to figure out how that works through the economy is fascinating. I'm also in the public policy world at William and Mary, and so I've been really paying a lot of attention to how things are going in public policy, what governments can do to try to alleviate the pain associated with this. And so it's been fascinating to see the research coming out about things like the CARES Act, and people, Secretary Lane, Ms. Coons were talking about federal help, and the CARES Act, a lot of it seems to have been extremely helpful and useful for the economy, helping people bridge, keep paying the rent, all sorts of good things about that. And so there's been an economics literature coming out of that, and we've been learning about that kind of public policy. So I think that's where a lot of the learning that we've been doing has been going on. But I just want to echo what Secretary Lane said. The problem is the virus, and we really need to get the healthcare situation under control, or just the health of people under control. And that's just a precondition for healing the economy.
Boy, that is such a great point. And of course, there's so many competing voices on that. We heard more of them just yesterday. So this question of public confidence is going to be critically important moving forward. We're also glad to have Raymond Mattis today. He's the president and CEO of the Virginia Retail Alliance. Mr. Mattis, thank you for joining us today, and give us a sense of what the retail landscape looks like.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for inviting us to be on this panel. Two perspectives. I can give you a national perspective. In 2019, there were 17 major retailers that shut their doors. That was actually 9,500 storefronts. So far this year, in 2020, we have seen 27 majors shut their doors. And many of this is due to the pandemic. Locally, we're seeing it's a mixed bag, but our boutiques, formal wear, business wear, suits, ties have been greatly impacted by COVID. No one's wearing suits, no one's wearing ties. There are no proms right now, or at least there wasn't. There's no big festivals. We have seen an increase in RV sales, boats, home improvements, books, nurseries, garden centers, desks, items that are necessary for remote learning. Obviously, your office supplies have done very well with laptops, headphones, cameras, things of that nature. So retailers have been impacted, small guys have been impacted gravely. And a lot of that is due to the fact that they either had to close up during the pandemic, or when they reopened on limited hours. Restaurants have, for obvious reasons, been impacted real bad. I don't know how many of them yet. We don't have a feel yet of how many are going to be able to get through the pandemic and keep their stores open. Originally, I thought maybe 6 to 9 months of reserves would get them through. Now I'm seeing 9 to 12 months. And based on what the secretary mentioned, I'm starting to agree that I try to be very optimistic, but it doesn't look like we're going to get through this until at the very earliest, the latter part of 2021. We've seen a lot of our members make a pivot. I hate using the word pivot. It's being used so much, probably overused, but online sales exploded. And for number two, traditionally 85% of all sales have come through in-store purchases. 15% have gone through online purchases. We've seen an increase on digital online sales by 71%. So there is a big shift there, and a lot of the smaller retailers are having to change how they do their marketing, how they do their commerce. Instead of relying on in-store sales, they've been forced to be more e-commerce marketing on social media like Facebook, Hulu, live streams, YouTubes, things of that nature.
You know, it's interesting too, when you think about the restaurants. I know there's been this big debate and calculation within the restaurant industry about how much in restaurant business you need and whether you can survive on takeout. And we're starting to see some really interesting conclusions from all that. Some restaurants determining, look, they just can't survive on the requirements for in-restaurant dining. So they're doing some very different things. And that's a very unfortunate forecast, but I think it's pretty clear-eyed. Thank you so much for being here today. We've got lots of questions coming in from our audience online, which we are very, very happy about. I guess there are several that come in around this area of higher education. And they have to do with how many universities have reopened. Deidre wants to know about that. And what the prospect is of universities, some universities who may be teetering on the brink, closing permanently, and what the impact of that would be on college towns. Secretary Lane, I don't know if you have thoughts about that, but if you don't, feel free to pass it on.
No, I do. In fact, as Secretary of Finance, I deal with the college presidents quite a bit in terms of not only during these times, but during the normal budget. So yes, and whenever you have a situation like this, you go back and look at the history of pandemics, it tends to exaggerate trends that were already happening. And Ray mentioned online sales. Now, they were a small part and growing. Now they're a large part of all the activity. And the same is true for, we talked about telecommuting, and I think that will be part of our future. It won't just be when we have problems. Organizations will be a part of their sustainability plans. And the same goes for higher education in that we have 16 higher education entities across the Commonwealth, ranging from very large colleges down to some smaller higher learning facilities. And of course, they've, just like K through 12 education, have had to make significant adjustments. One of the trends that was going on before all this happened was the amount of college eligible seniors coming out of high school simply for demographics was reducing. And they anticipate this trend to go on for the next few years. Another trend was, businesses continually complaining that college graduates, many of them were not matching the skill sets that they needed. So this conversation of going on, what was happening in higher education was going on well before COVID-19. And the question is, it's simply one of supply and demand in Virginia. And you recall last year, you probably weren't aware, Virginia Tech took an additional 1,500 students in their freshman class, which really hurt, quite frankly, Radford and James Madison and some others. And I'm not being critical of Virginia Tech, but because of this drying up or the lesser pools. So colleges were in a crossroads before this. Obviously now, with having to transition many to virtual learning, we have a panoramic across the Commonwealth. I was at George Mason just a couple days ago. They're under 1% positive prevalence rates. And then yet we've seen some others that have had to close the school and go totally to virtual. So it's not common practice across. Everyone's having to deal with their own particular instances. I know the colleges were already dealing with this, Kathy. One of the things that the Commonwealth did, the governor just announced a couple days ago, we were able to restructure quite a bit of their debt, about $300 million in principal over the next 24 months, to give them some breathing room to work through this. Not only COVID-19 and what the impacts are, but these other trends that were going on before. So I don't know the answer to the viewer's question, what's going to happen. I do know I've been dealing with several real estate foundations at colleges that are probably going to be in default of some loans because of the colleges not being here physically. Maybe some bad decisions by some of the real estate foundations thinking that trends were going to stay that way forever in that regard. So I know there's going to be some fallout, and we'll have to be dealing with this, I think, over the next year to 18 months. And I think you'll see some colleges shift. I don't know if you'll actually see any close. I don't want to predict that, but there will be some changes in higher education over the next 12 to 18 months.
I appreciate that, and I'm thinking about what Mr. Mattis said about all of these retailers who are going to have to hang on or not through late 2021, maybe into 2022. And I'm also thinking about this question that came in from our audience ahead of time that had to do with the fact that the AARP has studied this issue and said that 50+% of people 50 and over will be pushed out of the labor market prematurely, will never earn the same again. And so I want to come to you, Professor McHenry, because I think there's some relationship there to what are the roles that education can play moving forward. And you've got some specific demographic groups, certainly, and skill groups, retailers and the like, who probably are going to be in the need for additional other options on the other side of this. What are you seeing around the trends in that regard or the opportunities there?
I am not familiar with that particular AARP study, but I have looked at the numbers a bit recently, and the news is actually not as bad, I think, for the over 55 group. The hardest hit industry was leisure and hospitality, and that's the youngest industry that we have. And so if you look at employment, it's fallen for all groups, almost. And if you look at the employment, say, from last August to this August, it fell for people 55 plus. It also fell for people 24 to 54. It fell at about the same rate, actually. So I don't see this as a crisis that has hit the 55 plus group particularly badly. But I do recognize, and we've been thinking about this for a while, when you lose your job at 55, at 58, it's quite difficult to, land on your feet. And so that is troublesome, and has been, and this kind of crisis makes that more acute. So hopefully people have been saving. We know that people don't save as much as they like. So federal help getting through bumps in the road and gaps is certainly helpful, has been helpful. Hopefully more would be helpful. But there are also, resources. And so, the Virginia Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services is trying to connect small businesses and people, especially people who are later in their careers. And, Virginia Career Works has a lot of resources trying to figure out how to connect people to opportunities, and that might be a training, or that might be another job, might be a switch to another industry. Some industries are doing better than others. Some are growing. Long-term healthcare is growing a lot. In the short term, construction's actually doing pretty well at the moment. Now it's hard to transition from a insurance sales job to a construction job. I'm not saying that's easy at all, but there are some institutions that are trying to help with that transition, and so I'm hopeful that people will find those helpful.
Ms. Coons, I know you're underway with some programs in Northern Virginia that sort of begin to address some of this.
Yes, our community college system, certainly in Northern Virginia, the Northern Virginia Community College, but throughout the Commonwealth, I think is, as people think about the challenges they are going to face at whatever age that they may find that they are facing a future that, may not be stable going forward, is the upskilling and cross-skilling. And our community college system is such an amazing resource for certification programs. And some of them are short-term, right? And they are adjacent to the work you do. And so I would really urge anybody listening to this, if they know someone who's facing this, to do some research and reach out to your community college and see what professional certification programs are there. They're largely affordable, they're largely short-term, and they help you reskill really quickly. And that's something that the Chamber has really embraced in our back to work efforts. We have brought in the community college, our workforce boards, and we're trying to really create seamless connections among our community of providers and talented organizations, whether it be George Mason in our backyard, or as I say, the community college and our workforce boards and local government. Our local economic development organizations, Fairfax County has been hosting amazingly well-attended career fairs. And it's super easy to go onto your local economic development organization website, take a look there, see what they're doing, call them. They are there to make sure that people get back to work to industries who need them. Remember, there are many industries, I can certainly speak to Northern Virginia, that continue to face workforce shortages. Qualified positions are open. So take a look at these resources, and you really can make a difference in a relatively low impact. You don't have to go back for a 4-year degree. And so, yes, we're super focused on that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is, I think that's a daunting thing, whether you're 50 plus or whether you're somebody who's worked in retail and all of a sudden now you're looking at this prospect of late 21, 22 and thinking I might need to do a different thing. So every region in the Commonwealth has community colleges, workforce development boards. Just do input that into the Google machine and you can find all kinds of amazing opportunities there. Well, speaking of schools, certainly the impact of K-12 education is affecting so many workers who have children in that age range. And we have a question for you, a poll question for you, as we sort of shift into the impact of that. Billy, will you go ahead and share with us that poll question around schools?
Absolutely. This one's really close to my heart too, I've got to tell you. As you know, Kathy, I've got 2 children, a kindergartner and a first grader. So this has been such a harrowing process for me, but I have to tell you, I've been so thankful for the teachers out there. And it looks right now like there is a majority of us that, based on the responses coming in, have been happy with their school district return to school process, with over 63% of the responses coming back as positive.
Wow.
Now we've got about 40% of the audience in, so we'll leave it up for just another minute. But again, such an important question, I think.
Yes, indeed it is. And I'll tell you, the start to the school year was tough for everybody. I think there were so many people who spent the rest of the spring thinking, well, that was awful. Surely this won't be the case this fall. And as that dawning reality came online, that, yeah, we might be starting in some combination of in-person or online, it has really, I think, pointed up the disparities across the country in the technology divide. And I know a lot of localities are trying to really do something about that. So it looks like, Billy, still most folks pretty satisfied.
At this point, yes, ma'am, although I will tell you, as we close this out, that margin did shrink, with 59% reporting positive feelings, with 41% saying no. So it seems to be a much tighter split than originally when we launched the poll.
Interesting. All right. And so thank you for that. And boy, you can't go to work if you don't have childcare situation for your children. And when your children get to be school age, that's kind of where they go during the day. Secretary Lane, I know that you all have been very focused on this at the level of the Commonwealth, recognizing that important connection. What are you exploring from the Commonwealth's perspective around this issue of childcare?
No, you're right, Kathy. That is probably one of the most significant things we need to solve to help through this situation here. And many of those closed, obviously, during COVID-19 and have not reopened in that regard. A lot of things have been looked at. I know here in the city of Richmond, they looked at using some of their schools for healthcare or childcare facilities. The problem is that a lot of schools and different things have bonding documents that prohibit uses of certain things. It's amazing when you really get into situations what can and can't be done based on some of the history or the documents behind it. We have certainly used the stimulus dollars that have come from the federal government to help support childcare industries across the Commonwealth. A big part of the monies that we got directly, we gave almost half to localities. And again, that was primarily to make sure that they knew better than us where they needed the money. So K through 12 and childcare have gotten quite a bit of those monies, obviously among other things as we go across. But childcare is going to be a very key factor in making sure that we can exist during the long term of this COVID-19. I think we've now realized, obviously, Kathy, that this is no longer a sprint. It's going to take us some time to work through this. The risk, even if we do, I mean, we get a vaccine, we're now told it's going to come in at least 2 doses. And then, you know, in many vaccines, the first year is not that impactful. So it's going to take us some time to work through this. And childcare, I know, is top of the governor's mind and working with the localities, but typically it has to be a local solution because of the various needs in those areas. And that's why we work closely in getting these monies to the localities.
I wonder, Professor McHenry, what are you seeing in terms of, I think it's been very striking to look at the impact. We think about education as certainly a public good, but boy, we really got in touch with the value of education as a child care option as well in the course of this pandemic, for good or ill.
Right. I was teaching that yesterday in my labor economics class about human capital and training and in particular schools and how valuable they are to the society. And there are lots and lots of things that they do that are very good. And so finding a way healthfully to get kids back in schools, I think is a really big priority. I wish I had a great answer. I mean, more resources to have more spaces to spread out. I'm not as close to K-12 specifically, but at William & Mary, you know, we're trying to figure out how to do education on campus with people here. And I've been really surprised at how well it's going in a lot of ways. I think just silver lining wise, we started 3 weeks online, so all the classes were on Zoom, and I never had done that before, and it was really good. Breakout rooms are fabulous for teaching, at least at the college level. And now I'm teaching 2 classes in person where everybody is apart and I'm wearing a mask and using a microphone. And so there are ways to make things work. And I think, you know, everybody wipes down their space before, and it's different, but it's nice. Making that happen in a kindergarten classroom, oh man, you know, I've had kindergartners through my house, and you know, we've had, I guess we're on our 3rd now. So anyway, it's fascinating. I wish I knew how to get it.
Yeah, it'll be an issue we're going to continue to deal with, no question about it. Ms. Kuntz, I wonder, as you think about the businesses that are part of the chamber in Northern Virginia, have you been having conversations with the local school systems there? How's that been going?
Yes, we are very active with our education community from K through 12 and beyond. And I really want to thank Secretary Lane and the administration for really focusing and understanding that this is an enormous challenge for people going back to work and our economic recovery. We have also seen something we're greatly concerned about, which is the social equity aspect of this. Because there are certainly, I think, even without citing data, I think we can all note that a majority of care providers for children are women. And we do know anecdotally that women are dropping out of the workforce during this time to make sure that their kids are well educated in this new online format. At the same time, we also know that there are many people who simply can't afford to do that. And that becomes another social equity issue of the ensuring that all kids get the education they need. And again, we think about that future workforce that we so desperately need. We need all of our young people moving along at the same pace. So yes, it's something we're in open conversation with our educational institutions and local government officials. And again, we're really grateful that the state has prioritized this issue and is allowing localities to make the kinds of investments that they need to, particular to their area.
What seems clear in this is that patience is going to have to be a virtue we're all going to have to develop and hone over this time. It's striking to me when Professor McHenry was talking about, all of a sudden overnight we were all Zooming and going into breakout rooms and all the rest. I mean, you have to say when we have these, horrifying moments where we come up against this, we have to also say we've done a pretty good job of learning pretty quickly. We're thrown in the deep end of the pool, and we just kind of gotta figure it out. We have some questions, quite a number of questions around CARES Act, PPP, and the consequences of that, and the prospect for additional funding down the road. Donna says the PPP funding comes with tax consequences that will hit small businesses hard in April. What are the odds that Congress will allow deductibility of PPP funded expenditures? And of course, now we have this payroll issue too. Secretary Lane, I'll start with you, but see if anybody else wants to weigh in on that as well.
I think the CARES Act, those dollars, if they are forgiven, are not taxable. So those PPP loans will not be taxable and we conform here in the Commonwealth, so they would not be taxable at the state or the federal or the state level. So that
will happen.
Yeah, that's part of the CARES Act. The CARES Act, those loans, or if they are made into, of course, loans wouldn't be. If they are made into grants, they comply. They are not taxable, and we will conform at the state level to make sure they're not taxable also. So I don't think that the viewers have to worry as long as they comply and they are eligible to be turned to grant. Now, of course, if they're not eligible, they become a loan and they have to be paid back, and that wouldn't have tax consequences either. So in terms of that particular instance, I don't think that's a significant issue to worry about. The CARES Act did change a lot of the federal tax code related to the Tax and Cut Jobs Act that was put in just a few years ago, allowing businesses to go back and that they had eliminated the carryback, but now they're able to do so. So typically the CARES Acts are very favorable tax treatments. Again, I think those PPP grants will not have to be considered taxable income.
Let me just do a round robin here for the four of you and see, what do you think? Secretary, you said you felt like we were going to have some more infusion of federal funds. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think well, we don't have to, but if we don't, I think you're going to see a slowing of the economy. And this is not just my view. If you look at the Federal Reserve notes, most people think that fiscal stimulus will be less expensive than allowing it to go through without such. Now, I guess we're all new modern monetary theorists and saying that debt doesn't matter anymore, but now's not the time to deal with that. We will have a reckoning with the national debt. But in times of crisis, I think the Fed has learned that making sure that business can stay afloat is a better way and less costly than letting the traditionally, and then we have to come out of it. So in terms of the debt also to the country. So I do think that politics will get aside here, and maybe it won't be in the next few months, but I think no matter who wins the White House, there will be additional stimulus sometime, but it may be the first of the year.
I'm going to go around my Brady Bunch screen here. Mr. Mattis, what do you think? Do you think that that will happen after the election?
Well, I think, several things. 80% of our retailers have either reopened or partially reopened since they were shut down back in March. When the pandemic initially hit, our small guys were forced to either furlough or lay people off. And then they got double hit with the unemployment benefits were higher than what they were actually being paid. And typically retailers pay more than minimum wage, but a couple of dollars, but still they couldn't keep pace with what the unemployment pay was given. So getting those people back is also going to be a challenge for them.
Ms. Coons, how about you? Go ahead.
Well, the child care issue is very important because unlike a lot of businesses, retailers don't have the option to do remote working unless they're all on. But that's going to be a challenge as well. And education, doubling back to what Julie was saying, we've seen a huge increase in our virtual learning for how to operate a successful retail store. So, a lot of our guys have used this moment to educate themselves, to increase their marketing initiatives and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So,
Ms. Coons, how about you? From your perspective, what do you think about the prospects of that?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Secretary Lane that, come the new year, the pressures are just going to be too significant, that some federal stimulus will come back through. I think it's hard to predict what levels or with what sort of criteria gets attached to it. But given the expectation of how long it will take us. And I think this is shared also by business. Recently, there was a survey that the Chamber was an active participant. Many of our members answered, and they do not expect a return to office on any normalcy until summer of next year. So, it could be longer, but that was what the polling said. So, if that's the case, I would imagine that the federal leadership at both the legislative and the executive level will feel the pressure to do something.
The other question that we've had, which I think is such a great one, we've had some questions about real estate. I'm going to get to those in a moment. Okay. And before we do that, though, we've got a lot of questions from audience members, Secretary Lane, about the statement that the loans are forgivable, but the expenses paid with the funds are not deductible. So the tax impact is the same. Do you want to say some more about that?
No, I mean, in other words, the key is I know the expenses are not deductible because they're paying for them. Yeah, I mean, in other words, so it should be a net wash from the perspective of that. So I understand there, but the whole idea of those grants were to keep people employed, and so they're offsetting those expenses. So they wouldn't have those expenses if they weren't keeping people employed. In other words, they, from the perspective of getting the revenues were there to keep the people on the payroll. So those expenses are not deductible because they were paid for. So it's a wash that's what the intent of the language was. Otherwise, you would have laid the people off. You wouldn't have had those expenses. And you wouldn't have deducted them anyway in that. At least that's the intent. Now, I'm sure there are specifics, but that was the intent of the grants, to make sure that they were those people were employed. You'd have their payroll, but the federal government was paying for that.
Ms. Coons, looks like you want to jump in there, or am I missing that?
No, that is how we understand it as well.
Great. Thank you for that then. One of the other questions that came in, and I think we'll get some real estate questions in a moment because I know lots of people are thinking about these days. But there's this sort of general question that I think we can all relate to, which is what have we learned about ourselves in the course of this pandemic, about working with other people? And what do we kind of think those lessons will be on the other side? In other words, what are we going to carry forward into whatever the post-pandemic era is? Professor McHenry, I'm sure that you've done some studying on that.
Yeah, I have. So, I mean, personally, I've just come to realize how many things I took for granted and just aren't necessarily going to be the way I expected, like going to my office. I am in my office now, and I'm very happy to be, but I haven't been nearly as much as I usually am. But economists have been studying remote work and what remote work was like before the pandemic. Of course, it existed and was rising in popularity somewhat, but this has been a real nudge in that direction. And so I think some people are working from home and will continue to work from home even after the pandemic is over. Clearly, not everybody can do that. So some economists studied, which occupations can be done remotely and which can't. Obviously, some barbers and security guards have to be on the premises, have to be there. And so the jobs that can be done from home, more of them probably will be, but at the same time, I think proximity is very valuable, and a lot of businesses, just meetings in the hallway are valuable and useful, and being in the same room and reading your colleagues is very valuable. So I think we'll get back to office work more than maybe some folks are saying, but surveys of businesses recently have said that really large fractions of the population will probably still be working from home after the pandemic. There's also an inequality element to this as well, though. I mean, a lot of the people in occupations who can work from home are people with higher incomes, higher levels of education, and so if we're tilting toward a world where working from home is more of the norm and more to be expected, and you can adapt more to things when you can work from home, that's going to put people with fewer resources at the moment in more of a bind and put them more at a disadvantage, and I think that's really problematic and worth keeping an eye on for sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Manis, please.
One thing that's really come to my attention is the ingenuity and the creativity that small businesses have used to overcome this challenge and still survive it. That has just been incredible, from curbside delivery to setting up outside patios to the customer service issues as far as creating their websites, making sure they're very easy to navigate. I'm very proud of the guys that we have that have been able to get through this. I think the other learning moment is they need to maintain proper cash reserves to get them through these times, because a lot of the small guys, they're taking care of their staff, but they're not making anything. They're barely able to pay their bills. They're negotiating with landlords to reduce their rent. They're doing everything they can to keep their business above water and also keep their staff employed when they can. And they're sacrificing, but I think that's a learning moment.
Yeah. You mentioned, we've all sort of touched on this idea of real estate at some point or another. If so many of us are still working from home, do we need the real estate footprint that we've had? What about retail businesses that may not be able to make it, and so that real estate may be available? There's a sense that we have not seen the full impact of this from a real estate perspective. And one of our listeners is wondering about the value of mixed use developments and whether we're going to see that more and more, these places where you can live and have a business and the like. Secretary Lane, I know that the Commonwealth may be facing some issues around the real estate it holds.
Yeah, I guess having spent most of my career in real estate, I'm sort of glad I'm not in it now. I don't mean to suggest that. There's a lot of challenges coming up, a couple of issues to deal with. Commonwealth employs over 100,000 people, and yet I would suggest that maybe only a handful of us are actually coming in the office. So we have determined that government can exist without all the physical footprint. So I would suggest that's one thing that you'll see from the Commonwealth going forward. The other side of this is, and I know it's not just on the commercial retail side, but this whole issue of the moratorium on evictions and the moratorium on having the mortgage delinquencies and what that means. And while I am all favor of making sure that during this pandemic, it many times not being out of work by any of the participants' fault, that cannot go on forever without a significant cost. And right now, landlords are taking pretty much the brunt of it. Yes, some of them have debt relief, but on the other side of this, we're going to have to long-term come up with an equitable answer to this because that just is not long-term. You've seen the Supreme Court has said they will not continue the moratorium because of prejudicing one party against another. And being as a former landlord, obviously, we want to keep tenants. So I think most landlords are really trying to make sure that is the case and working with them in that. Now, I don't want to overstate whatsoever that we need to give help to those that have been impacted and continue to do so. I think besides all the direct aid and whether we were talking about whether that's from the federal government or from the state, we'll have programs to continue to do that. The best way is to get the economy back on track and get through this health crisis as fast as we can. So I think you're right, Kathy. I think there's a lot that's going to fall out in real estate. Just financing is going to be impacted going forward in terms of what you may see, the cost of real estate for lenders requiring more because they did their models based on financing on certain occupancies. And if you're not getting paid on that, it's going to be tougher to do that. So I think there's going to be a lot of fallout. And besides the social issues that we've got to deal with, the financial issues are going to be significant in the real estate industry as we move forward too. So, I mean, right now we're focused on making sure we help those individuals through no fault of their own cannot get through this impact, and that's what we should be doing. But there's got to be a longer-term solution to deal with this in terms of how we're going to house and help businesses and others maintain the housing stock that we have, because workforce housing is going to remain an issue well into the future.
It's a great point. Ms. Coons, where are you on this issue of changing trends in real estate? And our listener asks this mixed use question.
Yeah, so we do think there'll continue to be these mixed use, and they probably will accelerate. I would say that the commercial real estate industry is very challenged right now, but they're also incredibly creative, and they're working very hard to figure out what those trends look like, to Professor McHenry's comments about what that future mix looks like. And so, I'm hearing a lot of discussion about transitioning what have been traditionally, single use, if you will, offices into more multi-work or sort of multiple use, flexible spacing. That many businesses might not go back fully to an office, but they would still need. So again, I think we're going to see a lot of change. It's going to be very difficult. It is difficult for them now. And one thing to keep in mind too that we are focused on is from a locality perspective, many of their available revenues for all of these high social needs that we have today are coming from property tax. So we are concerned about the transition, which goes back to why the federal funding for state and localities is so important. There is a very significant tie-in there, but
I was thinking about an article I read recently about this issue that said that, yes, there will be some people who may be working at home up to 1 or 2 days a week. On the other side of them, talking about people who can do that, not in retail, obviously. And what we may have is not so much people fleeing large cities like New York and Washington, because I think there's been some conversation about the opportunities for localities in the Commonwealth to be attractive to those folks who are fleeing. But, and while that may be the case, what there may be is you'll have a corporate headquarters, but then you'll have satellite locations where work at home people could gather without having to go into the metropolis. I just thought that was a very interesting way to think about this. And I suspect real estate will have us scratching our heads on that for a while. Secretary Lane, I think the Commonwealth has.
One point on that, broadband will have to be key to that analysis you just made.
Great point.
And because, and that's a challenge that we're facing across the Commonwealth, and I should have meant that in talking about real estate. The changes will also be impacted by the ability for us to get broadband across all the income and socioeconomic specters, but also in the rural and the inner cities who right now are struggling with this. So I think a lot of that will depend. If you can have broadband, we have now found out, not just for instruction, but your business can be, a lot of people can be anywhere, not in retail, Ray, but you can be anywhere. So that's gonna, you'll see an emphasis on that, I think, going forward, where either real estate are gonna say, hey, I'll participate in this because it's so important if I want to do this. So I just want to make that point. Sorry to interrupt.
And I think that you're going to find that.
Go ahead, Mr. Maddox.
I think you're going to find that shopping centers and malls are going to have to really pick up the same concept and have mixed use with office space, residential space, and retail space.
I was thinking that would be great.
Yeah, we have a lot. Take a look at the Tyson's Corner development. I mean, I think that increasingly the success of that, their long-term plans, and how they've mixed so many housing, retail, office together is a real model for the future for many communities.
I want to begin to wrap up by thinking about this issue of work-life balance. And I think that's, boy, some people say that's a big old myth. And boy, even if you don't think it's a myth, it really has been tested in these last 7 months. Billy, do you have a question up for us so we can all participate in?
Yes, ma'am, I do, and you said it perfectly. The question simply is, has your work-life balance been impacted as a result of working from home? I can say personally, I would be responding yes. Sometimes it feels like it's harder to break away.
Yeah, I think that probably, this would be interesting to explore, but I think your answer to that question may be highly dependent on whether you have children birth to 12th grade in your home, because, you know, I think it would have to have an impact on that with so many people competing, you know, for the same space and the broadband and the online and all the rest of it. So I suspect that would be a complicator for folks. How are we looking with response so far?
So based on the responses that have come in so far, with about 50% of the audience participating, 83%, overwhelming majority saying yes, my work-life balance has been impacted.
Yeah, and I want to ask our panelists as well. What are you doing for yourselves, and then what are you hearing other people doing in terms of that issue? Because Secretary Lane, I think you said, well, maybe I don't want to credit the false person here, but somebody said it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and boy, is that true. So how do we go about dealing with those issues when, as I heard someone say, we're not working from home, we're living at work, which is kind of how it feels sometimes. I thought that was a very interesting way to put that. What are you doing for yourselves, and what are you hearing other people are doing to sort of maintain that work-life balance? Ms. Coons, can we start with you?
Sure. So, you know, it might sound simple, but for me, I've got sort of a really regular schedule I keep, and it helps me with that structure, you know, whether it's getting up at the same time, doing sort of the same things before even the workday begins. The other thing is I'm doing this, and I'm really encouraging my team to take vacation. You know, it feels a little weird, right? If you always went someplace for vacation, someplace that you enjoyed, and that might not be possible now, depending on circumstances. But I'm really encouraging them, and I'm doing it myself, where I am taking blocks of time to get away from the email and get away from the desk, so to speak. That's been hugely helpful to me. And it also, my experience is if I get a little time away, I'm a better thinker. So, you know, I can come back to that work with kind of new ideas and a refreshed and different approach. So trying to take the time that we had before in a more in a purposeful way for me.
Yeah, intentional. You know, that's the great thing about living in the Commonwealth. We have so many great places that are just
Beautiful
a
places to
couple of
go.
hours away. I mean, amazing diversity of geography and experience. And so that is one of the many great gifts about living in the Commonwealth. And Professor McHenry, how about you? What are you learning in the literature about how people are doing this?
Well, I think there's just a great variety of ways to deal with it. I mean, some people take a week-long vacation and then come back and work super hard. I'm a slow and steady wins the race kind of guy. So I just do the work that I can in the time that I have today, and I don't take really long hiatuses from work. But at the same time, when I got married, I was in the 3rd year of my graduate school, and the first 2 years I just worked all the time, all the time. And I wasn't a very pleasant person. And my wife said, buddy, if we're gonna get married, you're gonna have a curfew. And she gave me a curfew. And I've been living with a curfew for 15 years, and I can't work after 9. I'm not allowed to.
Oh,
And,
okay.
you know, she gives me exemptions sometimes.
And
but
what's your curfew limit? Is it 9, did you say?
9 o'clock p.m. That's right.
That's it. All right,
That's
very
right.
good. Mr. Mattis, how about you? What are you doing?
It's a very interesting topic. I did not think that I would be one that could survive working remotely. I thought I would be distracted. Now I find myself working longer and harder than I ever have in my career. I go from my office at home to my office here and go back to my office at home. I think that it's different for different people. I think there are some that can manage working remotely properly. I think there are some of those that they need to have that engagement. They need to have that team support, that component. From a staffing standpoint, as leaders, managers, we need to be very sensitive to the needs of our people in an equitable manner. So you got to take in all the situations out there.
It's such a great point. I think many people are having that experience of working harder than they ever have before. Secretary Lane, I wonder from your perspective, what are you doing? You have a lot on your shoulders with not just your own situation, but the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and I also think it may be generational on how people deal with it. I mean, I'm a blue collar family. All I've done most of my life is get up and go to work. And that continues whether I'm at home or not, although I tend to come in. Although unlike you, Peter, my wife is probably telling me don't come home as much in terms of that, because you're not coming home today, are you? But no, actually, Kathy, I'm using it, trying to at least 1 or 2 days a week work from home and help me transition because I have 14 more months in this job. And then my public service will be at an end, and I'm going to be doing something different. And so I'm just using it to transition as to what I may do next. So it is different, though, I'll have to tell you. And a lot of times, some of my cabinet members have an easier time doing this. The governor lives next to the Capitol. And so most of the decisions typically end up becoming financial across my desk. So I've got to have access, and he's been very good, but I try to stay close during that. But I'm finding more and more on Fridays, there's a nice place in the Commonwealth where I can work from. So I'm trying to do that. Yeah.
Try to get out there and do that. Well, thank you for that. I'm going to turn it back over to my colleagues at Inside Business and Cox Business Services in just a moment. But I do want to thank all of you for being with us today. I also want to say there is still some in our audience members are still having some concerns about the answers around the PPP. And that may have been the way I phrased that question. And I apologize for that if that's the case. So Secretary Lane, you may hear from some of the folks around that question as well. So
that's fine. I will just refer them to the Commissioner of Tax. So be happy to do
I may
this.
have confused that issue.
And Kathy, can I say we have we worked with Go Virginia to create a resource website. It's novabackttowork.com, and all of the links for all kinds of programs are there. So just easy access on the federal programs that may have many FAQs and that sort of thing as well. So novabackttowork.com.
novabacktowork.com. If you are in the Hampton Roads region, there's a 757recovery.com, which is a website where there's all kinds of forums and people weighing in on this issue in an effort not just to weather COVID, but to come out on the other side even better. So lots of resources out there. This is a conversation I feel quite confident we will revisit as we proceed. I am going to take into the rest of my day the expert advice from our panelists and also from our attendees this morning, and the thinking that we will probably be in the second half of 2021 at least, with Secretary Lane saying more like 2022, before we are back to business as usual. So I wish you well in that regard. We are really committed to bringing you programming that can help you understand where the Commonwealth is with this and help you understand where the various regions are with these issues, and also share with you the resources that are available for this period that will probably leave so many of us in a very different position. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Billy, would you like to wrap it up for us on behalf of Tribune?
Absolutely. And I just want to say thank you again to you, Kathy, for your excellent leadership this morning, and to the full panel. And from Virginia Media and Inside Business, have to give a major shout out and big thanks for the ongoing partnership with Cox Business. They are definitely one of our tightest partners, and love working with them on these events and everything else that we do as we continue to try to improve the economy across the board. So thank you all. Expect to receive an email in the next day or so with a link to the recording from today, a post-event survey we would love for you to take for us, as well as hopefully, or we will also include all of those helpful resource links that were mentioned just here in the wrapping. So with that, thank you again. Have a blessed day and see you next time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.